Hello, I'm Christopher Taylor with Sovereign Harmony, and happy Mother's Day to you. Today is May 13th, 2012, Sunday, and I wanted to follow up with my previous video from last month. I did a video on April 15th. This was about the Venus retrograde and occultation that's coming up here in early June, as well as the eclipses that are happening here in May and June. So, big time of transformation. That Venus occultation is extra special because it has a lot to do with filtering in the idea of the feminine. And so what a perfect day to follow up on that talk about the feminine here on Mother's Day. And so, you know, think of mothering in its pure essence form, okay? You know, a mom, you know, someone who gives birth to a child is a manifestation of the essence of mothering and nurturing, okay? And we all, you know, if we want to become whole, are going to have to eventually get to the place where we can nurture ourselves, to be our own mother, okay? And so you could think of Mother's Day as just honoring the sacred feminine. And so what a great day, like I said, to follow up on that past video. If you haven't seen it, you can find it on my YouTube page. Sovereign Harmony 1 is a YouTube channel. And so what I want to do with that follow-up was, from that video, I excluded a few big things that are happening here over the next couple of months, this May-June time frame. But what we're talking about here today is going to cover more larger scale, larger time scale kinds of transitions, okay? Whereas, you know, the Venus retrograde, that happens every 18 months, it just happens to be happening here in May and June. That it's an occultation makes it extra special. That's once every 120 years, okay? So that is a pretty big shift, but you know, these shifts do happen every once in a while. What the occultations don't usually have with them, though, is also coinciding with a larger scale shift of a fixed star, okay? The fixed stars, they take about 2,000 years, actually about 2,100 years, to change signs in the tropical zodiac, okay? And so the fixed star I want to focus on today is called Regulus. And I'll get back to that in just a second. I also want to cover today the Pluto-Uranus cycle and where we are with that now. This is huge, okay? Huge. And I want to talk specifically about the timing of it and the little mini generations that have occurred here since about World War II and what our functions are within those mini generations relative to what's about to occur, okay? And we'll get back to that afterwards. I want to start with this you know, continuation of the talk about the sacred feminine. The sacred feminine, again, is nurturing. It's about allowing versus doing, you know, being versus doing. And it's a key component of pure balance between masculine and feminine. Our whole society is based on the masculine. And especially within our society is the power structure, which is based on the masculine, okay? And so we've always had this hierarchical kind of structure, at least for the last couple of thousand years, okay? The fixed star Regulus, like I said, this is the fixed star we're going to focus on here, just changed signs here this spring. And you know, it's almost like when you wake up in the morning, it takes a little while to realize you're not dreaming still, that you're awake. So we've kind of shifted into a different energy with regards to power in the world and how power is viewed and utilized, okay? Regulus has been in the sign of Leo, in the tropical zodiac sign of Leo, for the last 2,100 years or so, okay? Leo is a very masculine sign. Very might is right, and you know, it's about putting your own fist first, and whoever has the biggest fist or the biggest pot wins, and lots of competition kind of energy in Leo. You know, and it's not surprising that in the last 2,100 years, going back to when this started, this is the rise of the Roman Empire, essentially. It was at the very start of when Regulus entered Leo. And this was a whole form of power and control that was very much aligned with the masculine, okay? And so, you know, you hear people talking about the age of Aquarius and the shift in the age of Aquarius. It's interesting, too, that this shift in the ages, which have more to do with the themes of that age, are coinciding with this shift in power, okay? And that's the Regulus aspect. So it's very interesting to note that the last 2,000 years or so have been the Piscean age with a Leo power structure, okay? Pisces is an energy that deals with religion and belief and sacrifice of the self for the many and all of that. And Leo, the power structure, this masculine way of going about it, war. Like I said, the Roman Empire started around this time. Mine, not yours. Leo's a very mine, very, it's very clear about boundaries about the self, okay? And so the sense of having versus have-nots, very Leonian kind of energy. Only in a Leo power structure would we create power in a way that allows some to have and others not to have an imbalance of beingness, an imbalance of creative expression is what it really comes down to, because it is that creative expression, which is the essence of Leo, that gets blocked when the structure is such that only a certain few can creatively express and only a certain few, most people can't, basically. And that's all come through with how we've structured our money, our currency, and how that allows the power elite, as they're often called, to creatively express. In other words, do whatever they want, when they want. And most of us have to kind of slave, day to day just to survive under that regime. But it's all part of the Leo power structure, okay? Another interesting thing to note, when we talk about any kind of planet or star or asteroid that's going to cross over the last degree of any sign, the 29th degree, there's 30 degrees in each sign, 12 signs, 30 times 12 is 360, that's the full circle, okay? So when we get to the 29th degree, the last 1/30th of any sign, this is the most intense expression of that energy. And so when we look at this 2,000 plus year time frame of Regulus in Leo, it's been roughly the last 70 plus years or so that Regulus has been in the 29th degree of Leo. And so that takes us back to about the late 1930s when Regulus entered the last degree of Leo. So we can think of it, again, the last degree is like the last ditch effort of that sign, a last ditch effort to express the energy through that manifestation, that form of manifestation before the next rung of evolution or transformation, okay? And so in the late 1930s, this power structure, this Leonian power structure took an extra ante up, okay? This is when Hitler came into power, okay? Right at the very beginning here. And this is when World War II in general was birthed, and nuclear weapons were used, okay? We're talking about ultra-masculine expressions here, okay? And there's nothing wrong with a masculine, but this is kind of showing us that what happens when we put or allow our power structures to get, wrapped up purely in the masculine energy and what that imbalance causes, okay? And it's interesting to note, too, things like sports, which are representative of strong competition. Before World War II, there were plenty of sports out there. People played sports. We had, even like baseball in America, had Babe Ruth before World War II, everything else. People enjoyed them, but it wasn't as intense as it has been with Regulus in the last degree of Leo. Okay, since World War II, World War II was a little bit of a difficult time when it came to sports and enjoying that kind of creative outlet, that recreation, okay? Even sports players like Ted Williams of the Boston Red Sox, for example, who quit baseball for a few years to go flight fighter jets in World War II. You don't see much of that going on these days. That's why this generation often gets pegged as the greatest generation. I mean, there was a sense of priorities, I think, that we don't even view now. But that's a totally different story. We won't get into that. We'll talk a little bit about the generations, though, later, but not with regards to that aspect specifically. But anyway, sports, since World War II, since things pieced out a little bit, especially in America, where things were peaceful after that point, this is when sports blew up. This is when, and then especially with TV and being able to broadcast these kinds of things and getting more and more people into it. Stadiums that used to, a baseball game, a few thousand people was a pretty big crowd. Now we have tens of thousands of people, plus standing room and people at bars outside of sporting events. And we have something called the Super Bowl, a yearly event that everyone is, it's a holiday for all intents and purposes, Super Bowl Sunday. So sports is taking on a whole new level here with Regulus in the last degree of Leo. This ultra-masculine expression of competition. And what I find interesting is that the very tail end of this, the last decade or so of this, we even have, extra emphasis on that competition. We have what, UFC fighting has really come out as a popular sport. I mean, this is essentially human cockfighting, I mean, yes, they're skilled in martial arts and everything else. No one's taking anything away from that. But we're putting two people in a cage and basically saying, beat each other senseless, and we're going to love it. If it doesn't get, if you can't understand ultra-masculine, there is your expression right there. Ultra-masculine expression. And what's happened is we're kind of at the end, we've just transitioned. Regulus is now in Virgo. And so it's a very different energy. And so we're leaving this whole pulse. In addition with that, the whole idea of Hollywood and glitter and glam. This is very Leo, okay? Glitter and glam is very Leo. Marilyn Monroe kind of was at the beginning of this Regulus at the 29th degree of Leo. And it things kind of opened up in different avenues from there. And, look at where we are now. We have this like reality TV, what's perceived as reality or portrayed as reality. And this whole idea of, bling, essentially, has become this important thing in our society, and it's like over the top at this point. And that makes sense. This is the time for things to be over the top in terms of that expression, okay? And we allow, again, this is all about power structure. So we essentially worship our Hollywood stars. We worship our music producers, the musicians. We worship our sports players. There's a sense of they have more power than us. And how is that reflected? Look at how much more money or power that they actually have. They have more creative capacity. We've given up our Leonian expression, our creative capacity, to the people in power. And the people that we put in power are our sports and other celebrity people in Hollywood and whatnot. We've given them our power, okay? And so, but this is just to show us how far it can go. And people always say it's getting worse and worse over time, but remember, this is only from the framework of someone who's only living a life of about 80 years or so. So within anyone living now, yes, it has, with regards to that expression of energy, it has gotten worse and worse over time. Absolutely. For good reason, because of the timing that it's occurring. It is time for us to see that. It is time for us to see how ridiculous, this extra expulsion of Leonian expression is in a power structure. How ridiculous it is to give our power away to those who don't really have any more power than we do, okay? So this is where we are. We're at a transition zone, and it's impossible for anyone living today to really even see what I'm about to talk about, to really understand what I'm about to talk about. Even though you might feel it inside, to think that, oh, this could happen in reality will seem far-fetched, because we haven't seen it, because we've been stuck in this era of Regulus in the 29th degree of Leo, the ultra expression of that masculine, of that imbalanced power structure, okay? With Regulus entering Virgo, okay? Virgo is a much more feminine energy. It's an energy much more aligned, and this is a key word, aligned with the earth and resources, okay? And so this Virgo energy is also about order and structure and purpose and service and health, okay? So what we're stuck with the 29th degree of Leo with Regulus, the power structure with Monsanto and other food organizations that have the power to essentially tell us what we could eat as food, and what's going to be on the market versus what isn't. With Regulus in Virgo, now there's a sense of choosing food that is right for us. And that's going to differ from individual to individual. We all have different diets that are specific to us. That's one aspect of this. Getting out of this control of food in that old Leo power structure and into a more purposeful, service-based, directed sense of food. In other words, if this is what you need, this is what we'll produce for you. Okay? And so more variety in foods and a more natural approach to food production, because that is the healthy approach. Okay? More taking care of our bodies. Wellness will explode here in the next 2,000 years, starting right now. These next couple of decades will be the buildup of this change, of this transition. And the fact that we have this Venus occultation that I talked about in my previous video, happening right here in May and June, this is signifying the flux into the feminine finally. We're on the other side. Now, and with Regulus entering Virgo, well, guess what? It is time to start building this more feminine society, a more feminine power structure, which is more equal, more balanced, okay? More flat, less hierarchical. More flat, more equal, more everyone has their say. A better reflection of freedom, okay? That isn't at the expense of others. It's more liberty than anything else. It's probably a key word. And we'll get back to the idea of liberty when we start talking about the Pluto-Uranus cycle that I mentioned earlier. But in any case, the power structure, because of the shift into Virgo, with Regulus and Virgo, it's much more about doing what makes sense and doing what is, kind. Virgo is a very kind energy. Mother Teresa, here's a Virgo energy, okay? Service, taking care of. But it's also got some boundaries, the sense of something can be so right for one thing and so wrong for another, and understanding the difference between that. The discrimination is another key word for Virgo, discrimination. And so Virgo energy gets a reputation for being, very callous in some cases and judgmental, but it's really this discrimination energy that just gets wrongly or improperly channeled. That's what it is. But it is this ability to discriminate, to know that there's not just one way, that there's multiple ways, and that whatever way makes the most sense, that is most logical, that's what we use. And in the health field, again, Virgo deals with how we're properly aligned physically, how our bodies are digesting what we're putting in, and then what we're removing that we don't need, okay? And so all of society starts to reflect proper digestion, okay? So taking the best, leaving the rest. That's a slogan I use quite a bit when I do presentations and things. You don't have to take everything I say, and you don't have to leave everything I say. You can choose what works for you, and you can, leave what you want behind. That's a very Virgo approach. I'm a double Virgo. I have a Virgo ascendant and my Virgo moon right on the ascendant, even though I'm a Pisces on the other side of the chart there, speaking of the astrology aspect. So the Virgo energy is something that I emit. It's something I come across with. This is how I project myself in a very Virgo way. So think of that kind of an energy. I come across very logical and sensible, even though I might talk about some things that are out there, okay? And that's the Pisces in me, the real me inside. But I come across in a very sensible and logical way. And just understand that this is the way that power is restructuring itself, okay? And it is a more feminine way, and because of that, it will allow for more feminine energies to lead the way, which can literally translate into female leaders, etc. More female leaders. And that's already happening, this is not anything new. We're already ready for it. 2008, the U.S. election already showed us, a female could be president. It's possible. Any election prior to that, it was just a pipe dream. It was something that we knew inside was possible, but in reality it didn't seem like we could actually see it. But 2008 showed us that it can be seen, it can be done. Now it can just happen when it's ready to happen, okay? It's the same thing I'm talking about here with this idea of shifting from a society that is so enthralled in this 29th degree energy of Leo, which is extra glitz and glamour, extra worship of sports and Hollywood stars and everything. And it's not going to fade overnight or anything, don't get me wrong, but we'll notice over the next generation or two that valuing that is going to start fading as we start gaining a sense of our own equal power to those people that we've been worshiping. And it's already started because, here we are in an age where anyone can post anything on the web and become an instant quote-unquote star, right? We all have Facebook accounts. We all have an ability to get out there on some level and to reach people on some level. You don't have to be a quote-unquote star to do so. And so the playing field is already leveled, or it's already leveling. And so it's a natural transition to come off of this worship outside of ourselves to whoever we're giving power to that represents our creativity, rather than focusing on our actual creativity, okay? And that's the key thing there. Learning that we have something creative to offer, and that's going to be different than anybody else. And that's a Virgo approach, okay? Discriminating between your creative aspect and the creative aspect of the whole, and what you're expected to do, okay? And so Regulus in Virgo is a very different way of approaching power and respecting power than it ever was in Leo, okay? And it's going to take some transition. Like I said, we're not quite ready there yet, but there is something in the air. There is a shift in the air. This Venus occultation retrograde period and these eclipses here in Gemini and Sagittarius in May and June are part of the button that kind of pushes us on the other side. And so we're ready to start receiving this transition into that Virgo power structure and out of the Leo power structure, okay? Again, it's not overnight. Don't expect some flash, but this is the transition that we are in, okay? And, you know, it does take some actual effort to change society. You don't just say, oh, it's time for change, let's just allow it. That's the ultra feminine. You know, we do have to balance that feminine with the masculine, which is actually doing something about it, okay? That transitions me to this next idea of the Pluto-Uranus cycle that I promised to talk about, okay? The way that the planetary cycles work, if you're familiar with the new moons and full moons and the way that works, once a month we get a new moon, which just basically means the moon is with the sun. They're conjunct in astro terms, okay? They're together in the same part of the sky. That starts a new cycle. Then when the moon becomes 90 degrees apart from the sun, or 3 signs away astrologically, because 3 signs is 1/4 of the 12 signs, so it's, you know, a quarter of a circle away. That's called, you know, this is the first rung of it's the new moon, then the first quarter moon. Then we have the full moon a week later, okay? And that's when the moon is opposite the sun, literally in the sky. We have that's why when we have a full moon, right at sunset, we have moonrise, okay? The moon rises right at sunset because it's in the opposite location of where the sun is, okay? That's the full moon, that's the culmination phase. So we have, new moon is like planting seeds, okay? When they're together. This is a seed planting phase. The first quarter moon is the phase of cultivating those seeds, okay? Doing what we gotta do, cutting the weeds out, making sure that they're growing in the right direction we want them to grow. The harvest is the full moon phase, okay? This is when we have our fruits, the fruits of our labors, and it's time to harvest. The final quarter, on the other side of it, this is kind of cleaning things up, finishing up, and wiping the slate clean for the next round. It's about to start, okay? And it's also assimilating everything that we've harvested and everything else, okay? So that's the basic cycles. So all the planets have these cycles with each other. Pluto and Uranus, we're going to talk about that cycle specifically. The last conjunction of Pluto and Uranus was in the mid to late 1960s, okay? Not the quietest time, okay? The mid to late 1960s almost looks like a blip on the screen. It's like, you know, post-World War II up until the mid-60s, things were kind of copacetic. You know, there was a certain kind of order in the world, or at least an attempt to put order in the world. You know, then things kind of blew up. And then it almost seems like it faded away. And it was kind of, now we look at the late, you know, mid to late 1960s as this kind of iconic time. There's, oh, that was interesting, you know, the counterculture and all of this. But we don't look at it as something that was planting seeds. And that's what it was. It was planting seeds with the themes of Pluto and Uranus. Pluto being deep transformation, actualization, truth coming through. And Uranus being the collective consciousness, okay? This is, and also individuality and everything that Uranus represents. When we put them together, we have a time period of planting seeds for a new, you know, for the actualization of truth for collective consciousness. And in that case, Pluto and Uranus were both in Virgo. Here's that Virgo energy. Remember, Regulus is entering Virgo. So we started planting the seeds in this Virgo energy. What was coming out of that time? Awarenesses about our effects on the globe, on the environment, on other species, on ourselves, you know, pollution, etc. The EPA, you know, Richard Nixon in 1970, this is pretty much right after this period when all of these, you know, environmental laws started coming. The Environmental Protection Agency was created, essentially. Our awareness was planted as far as our effects on the earth, our effects on our resources, etc. Okay? So, you know, also civil rights, women's rights, you know, you name it, and the whole world was going through all kinds of turmoil and upheaval. What was happening was a birth of these realizations, a birth of these truths about what was out of order. That's what it comes down to, because Virgo is about order, essentially. What is out of order? And we were made very clearly aware of what was out of order at that time. And with Regulus entering Virgo here just recently, our power structure is about to take over what was planted there, okay? But even more so, we just focus on the Pluto-Uranus cycle. If that's when the seeds were planted, well, when are we cultivating those seeds? When is that first quarter phase? Well, that first quarter phase is coming up. And that's when Pluto and Uranus are squaring each other. In other words, 3 signs apart. Right now, we have Pluto in Capricorn and we have the planet Uranus 3 signs apart in Aries. Because Uranus moves a little bit faster, it finally got to the point where it's 90 degrees away from Pluto. It took over 40 years, okay? The very first exact conjunction, or sorry, exact square between these two will occur in late June of 2012. So here we are on May 13th. We're looking, 5 or 6 weeks from now, we're gonna be underway in the first exact square, the first initiation of the cultivation of the energies that were planted in the mid to late 1960s with regards to the realizations of truth of what was out of order and what needs to put back into order. Okay, and in addition to that, we have Regulus entering Virgo. So, whoa, timing! It is time to do this. It is time to do something about the energies that were birthed in the mid to late 1960s. Okay, now we're actually going to have 7 exact squares between Pluto and Uranus between June 2012 and April of 2015. Okay, so this general 3-year period is the period of cultivation of what was planted then. It is our decision-making time, literally, what we're going to do about what we already know to be true. Okay, and with Uranus in Aries, again, this is collective consciousness in an Aries energy, which is individual liberty. Here's the idea of liberty I promised to come back to. Individual liberty. And with Pluto and Capricorn, this is about tearing down current structures and rebuilding more appropriate structures to support the new truths. And those new truths are surrounding the idea of individual liberty. Okay? This is why it's already started. We haven't even begun to see it yet, but it's already started when we had the Arab Spring. We had the Occupy movement that spread across the world. Seemed like nothing, okay? And I want to tell you, back in mid-September, when the Occupy movement started, Pluto and Uranus came close to their first square, but not quite. And then they pulled away. Astrologers, I've been into astrology for a long time, and way back, remember when I first got into it like 10 years ago or so, they were talking about this time period coming up, 2012 to 2015, a Pluto-Uranus square, and the implications of what it could result in all kinds of upheaval and tearing down of structures and rebuilding of structures according to individual liberty, according to freedom, on a worldwide basis, okay? And so speculation abound about what that could mean. Knowing that September 2011 was going to be a time when these planets would approach their first square but not quite get there, we thought we might get a preview, okay? And we did. This is when the Occupy movement started. And you can say what you will about that movement, but in my opinion, all that movement did was show us how quickly ideas can spread amongst the commoners. That's what it showed us. Because in mid-September, we just had an Occupy Wall Street thing. By mid-October, we had an Occupy the World thing. That's 30 days, okay? That's insanity relative to any other kind of movement. So if it did anything, it showed us, whoa, we can make the word spread and we can band together quickly if we need to, okay? That's what came out of it. Expect that to be applied on some level here over the next 3 years, with the world recognizing how it needs to direct itself to preserve individual liberty and to create structures that are appropriate for that. That's the Pluto and Capricorn side of this. Create structures that are appropriate for that truth, okay? But it does require taking down the old structures. All these old structures are based on the Leo power structure, the hierarchies, okay? Kings and queens and whatnot, even though we think we're out of the feudal system and whatnot, CEOs and everything, these are on a corporate level, it's kind of the same deal. These are people that don't have to do anything, but that reap all the benefits from everyone else under them doing stuff. No different than a king and queen, right? And in family structures, this is happening as well. The idea of allowing a more flat structure and allowing adults to be adults, when they're ready, and not keeping people under this whole lock and key of, parental domination until the day that the parent, or the one that happened to be the one that came before, dies and allows the next one to come and take power in that family structure. But it's happening everywhere, in the microcosm, the macrocosm, and now is the time, is the point, okay? So, in addition to all that stuff I talked about in my previous video, the Venus retrograde and occultation, that revaluing ourselves. We're revaluing ourselves to realize that we don't have to give our power away to something above us, to like our movie stars and our sports players and our government officials and our CEOs of the companies we work for and everything. That we have it. Regulus enters Virgo. Now it's time to restructure that power. Okay? And it's time to recognize what we found to be true in the mid to late 1960s but haven't done anything about yet. It's time to put it forth, okay? And so you might be thinking, well, wow, if that's the cultivation period, you know, this is all about making decisions. So whatever we decide now in the next 3 years, so very important 3-year period, you know, very, very important 3-year period. The full moon phase, in other words, when Uranus opposes Pluto, this will happen in the mid to late 2040s, and it sounds ridiculously far away right now. It's only about 35 years away, okay? You know, we look back 35 years ago, where are we? We're in, you know, the mid to late 1970s, you know. A lot of people alive today were alive in the mid to late 1970s. And they can kind of make comparisons of life and how things have changed. We'll be in the full moon phase, the harvesting of what we decide now based on what was planted in the mid to late 1960s, okay? This is the way it works. And so it becomes extremely important that we are laying the seeds correctly now. I should say cultivating what was planted correctly now. At that time, in the mid to late 2040s, Pluto will be in Pisces, opposing Uranus and Virgo. Wow, there's Virgo again, right? You know, it'll be time for collective consciousness to be in this Virgo mindset, okay? Like I said, Regulus did enter Virgo, but it's a 2,000-year period. It takes some transition, a couple of generations here. So I'm talking 35, 40 years. We'll finally be in a collective consciousness where the Virgo mentality, the sense of doing what is right for your own body, your health, doing what is right for the earth and our resources, you know, holding true to the sacred feminine in what we do because it makes sense, because it represents balance. It's not weakness, it's balance. You know, that's the sensible part of the feminine. It is balance, okay? It isn't weakness. It isn't something that takes away from the masculine or takes away from life. It helps actually enhance life, enhance the creative aspect, the inspiration that comes from the masculine side of life, okay? And that's what we're learning about, okay? So that's what we're looking forward to. It's a little bit down the road, but I wanted to focus on this time period and what we're going through and how, you know, just how significant this is. I mean, when you add it all up, there's just a whole lot going on here in this late spring, early summer portion of 2012. You know, forget about the Mayan calendar, December 21st, 2012 stuff. That's going to be a blip on the screen that we're not even going to, you know, it'll just be, I can't wait to get to the other side of that because then no one will talk about it anymore, and that'd be great, you know. I don't see the world ending in any way, shape, or form. I do see it transforming quite a bit, and these energies I'm talking about are a big part of showing us that it is time for this to happen. And even though we can't visualize it in a lot of people's cases because they haven't seen it. We've been trapped in this power structure of Regulus in the 29th degree of Leo our whole lives. You know, we don't know any other difference. Even though, yeah, I would love it to be a different way, or I would love to be able to do what makes sense and to nurture my own power, my own creativity, and be equal. But that's not practical, right? That's kind of the approach, but now realizing that it is time to do that. It is time to pull in the feminine. It is time to activate that, okay? So now what I want to do is focus on the generations. I mentioned the generations relative to this Pluto-Uranus aspect, okay? So Pluto, Uranus, and the planet Neptune. These are all 3 outer planets. They represent the collective more than the personal. When we're looking at charts of people and whatnot, these collective planets, Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune, unlike planets like Mercury, Venus, and Mars, which are more personal, they reflect the collective generations of energy. Whereas like Mercury, Mars, and Venus are going to reflect a lot of your and my unconscious tendencies. And we're not certainly etched in stone or predetermined by those, but you know, they give us an idea of our unconscious tendencies. The collective planets, Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune, these have a whole lot more to do with, you know, essentially the collective and where the collective is going, okay? So, we can go all the way back to the generation right after World War II, the baby boomers, okay? The baby boomers, they had Pluto in Leo with Neptune in Libra, and that's what's called a sextile, okay? And I'm going to show you a chart here. They also had the planet Uranus in Gemini, so I'll show you that right here. Okay, that Pluto-Neptune sextile component of that came into place. Both of those planets move at a relatively similar speed. So when they lock into an aspect, it lasts a long time. When I say a long time, I mean we're talking 60 plus years here, okay? So that sextile started around that time, post-World War II, and it has lingered all the way until the present time. like right now, Pluto's in Capricorn, Neptune is in Pisces, 2 signs away. Okay, so in terms of signs, at least, it's lingering. It is still lingering today. They're still 2 signs apart from each other. Okay, so anyone born between, say, World War II and now have this sextile, this flowing potential of energy between Pluto and Neptune. And this has a lot to do with, again, truth actualization of our ideals on some level. And each mini generation, depending on what signs Pluto and Neptune are in, represent a different sense of truth and ideals. Okay? But the point is, it started in the mid to late 1940s with the baby boomers. They have this Pluto and Leo, which is the actualization of self, the truth of self. Okay? But it in a sextile to Neptune in Libra, which is the ideals of well-balanced relationships. So the ideal of this generation is to be able to actualize self while staying balanced. This is my idea of sovereign harmony, when you really think about it. This is coming to our own sovereign wholeness. That's kind of the Leo energy, so we can harmonize. That's the Libra energy, okay? So this generation, that is kind of their intent, right? And they also have this Uranus in Gemini. So this is the collective consciousness just kind of being almost like an open ear, feeding in information. You know, they're just getting whatever they're told. Yes, 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 yes. And, you know, this is a generation that was just told, if you, post-World War II, America especially was trying to tell people, you know, this is what safety is, this is what security is. You know, get your house, get your separateness, they were really appealing to the Pluto in Leo component of the baby boomers, which was like, you matter, you matter. But basically saying, separate yourself, separate yourself, separate yourself. This is how you become safe, you know. And you're going to have pensions if you have a full-time job, and all these ways of taking care of yourself in retirement. And they're like, yes, we will, yes, we will, yes, we will. Okay. And the baby boomers are the first ones to tell you right now the reality of that, which is that, whoa, our retirement might not be even here for us. You know, they're all retiring as we speak, and they're all experiencing the retirements going kaput, because there was a lot of rhetoric, a lot of narrative there. But this collective consciousness at the time was open to that narrative. It was open to the information of, oh, this is what life is. This is what good versus bad is. Okay, okay, yes. We don't want World War II to happen again. So yes, we'll do what we're told. We'll do what we're told. And it kind of fed in. Okay. The way I look at it, that whole generation's purpose in the greater scheme of this transition that we're in right now. Again, we're in this very key decision-making phase from June of 2012 to April 2015 with the Pluto-Uranus square. The whole transition that we're in, their purpose is to show us that the rhetoric or the narrative that was given to them isn't truth. It doesn't work. Okay, and we don't, you don't need to be an economist to realize that, you know what, this system had a couple of generations of life in it, the way it was portrayed, and that's pretty much it. You know, math is math. Money adds up, and things have to go kaput at some point. It's interesting to note that the next important generation of these configurations of Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, representing kind of collective importance, was the mid to late 1960s. We already talked about this. When Pluto and Uranus were conjunct in Virgo, and they were both sextiling Neptune in Scorpio. So here's a look at that brief chart here. So within this energy of the Pluto-Uranus conjunction, I already talked about the birthing of the truth of what was out of order, what needed to be put into correct order. These baby boomers were the ones, these were the hippies, you know, of the mid to late 1960s. They were already ready to say, hey, we're doing it wrong. Let's do something different, you know. And the babies that were born in the mid to late 1960s, who are now in their mid to late 40s, these are all the people that are about to be thrust into power. Okay? Remember, they have Pluto-Uranus in Virgo in their chart, which is a sense of let's create structures that are correct, that are right. And to this point, being in their mid to late 40s, some of them haven't been able to be leaders yet. But these are born leaders. And they're born leaders with the vision, with Neptune and Scorpio, to change. When they get the opportunity, they're going to change things. And what's happening here is we're going to see, I think, a rapid overthrow of who is in power, you know, which is a lot of people that are in power that were born before the mid-late 1960s. And they're going to be rapidly replaced by people who are now ready to take power, who are in their mid to late 40s, approaching 50. And they represent this energy of, let's do what makes sense, according to the vision of, you know, even if it takes totally annihilating what already exists to create what will exist and what will be more purposeful for what makes sense. This is the kind of energy that's in that collective generation that was born in the mid to late 1960s, okay? And so they're all going to be coming into power during this window of 2012 to 2015 when we're making decisions for what it's going to ultimately turn into in the 2040s. So you can kind of start following along the importance of this and who is who, okay? The next significant generation on this timeline is actually my generation, the late 70s to early 80s, okay? This is a generation where now Uranus left Pluto and it found its way halfway in between Pluto and Neptune. So here's a look at that chart for the late 70s, early 80s babies. Okay, we are all in our kind of early 30s, early to mid 30s right now. Okay, and so we're all old enough to, you know, kind of have some wisdom, kind of have some knowledge, kind of be, you know, some ability to have a way to give our gifts to the world, but we're not quite respected enough, we're not quite old enough to be put in those positions of power and authority, like the ones that are born in the mid to late 1960s, who are now approaching 50 years old, okay? But we do have a function. And it's interesting to note, with seeing Uranus halfway between Pluto and Neptune, we are essentially the bridges. We're the balancers of the new and the old energy. These people coming into power, the ones born in the mid to late 1960s, they are ready to change in whatever ways they need to change things to make it right. But they need some guidance because they're coming from the old energies. I mean, they represent the new energies. They are the forefront of it. But they grew up in and are infused with the old energies and the old ways of being. They need someone to advise them as to how to make it right for the generations that are coming, okay? And who are their advisors? Well, that's my generation. My generation is filled with a bunch of people that are more suited for teaching, mentoring, and advising than leading. We are go-betweens. We are mailmen, you know, we're couriers of information, okay? And what I do right now, this is what I'm doing right now, is actually a representation of that. Our best skill as a collective generation is our ability to kind of see both sides, recognize the value of both sides, and recognize the value of the transition and the balance required. We have Pluto in Libra. This is a sense of the truth about relationship, okay? What I bring forth in my Sovereign Harmony is this truth about relationship that, you know what, the old codependent model doesn't work anymore, you know, and that's what we're bringing forth as a generation of honoring the independence, but, you know, it doesn't mean we're obliterating relationship. We're just trying to honor independence within it. We have Neptune in Sagittarius, which is the sense of our collective vision looking well beyond the boundaries. So we see beyond the boundaries of what is, and we can see, you know, we could say, okay, well, it might not be yet, but we can make this happen. And then we have Uranus in Scorpio, and that's the part of our collective generation, late 70s and early 80s again. You know, we're not, our collective consciousness is a consciousness of let's tear down. You know, we got to tear down to get at the heart, to get at the roots so that we can, you know, again, help these leaders, help these people that are, you know, about 15 years older than us, put things together and take charge, okay? So while we're acting as advisors to these leaders in this current time, we're also acting as mentors to the next significant generation. That next significant generation of these three energies, Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune, are the ones born in the early to mid 90s. These are the kids that, and I don't want to call them kids, they're young adults that are roughly late high school to early college age, say like 17 to 20, 21, that kind of range, okay? And here's a look at their chart. They have Pluto in Scorpio, and that's in a sextile to Neptune. Remember that Pluto sextile to Neptune is in effect for 60 years or so. And Uranus happens to be conjunct Neptune now in Capricorn, okay? So here's a look at that chart. So this is roughly 20 years ago, and so these, like I said, these young adults are now entering the real world. The way they're structured is very interesting to me. I've done charts for people in this generation more than people, you know, a little bit older than they are, more than people in my generation in some cases. This is a generation that's already grown up, like ahead of its time, already in this kind of adult phase. They don't get the old energies. They don't even understand how they can possibly still be working, okay? With Neptune in Capricorn and Uranus in Capricorn, This is a collective consciousness and a collective vision amongst these young adults right now that basically says this is how they can kind of already see how it can work, what structures can work, and they collectively want to just get there. It's kind of a no-nonsense approach, like, what are we doing still dealing with this inequality, still dealing with this garbage? Like, let's just get rid of it and move on. Okay? They have Pluto in Scorpio. You know, this is a very get rid of it energy and let's move on kind of thing. These are our future leaders. Okay? They're about 20 years old, plus or minus right now. But when we get to the 2040s, when this all comes to culmination, guess who's going to be in their 50s? This generation. Okay? The generation born in the early mid-90s. Our leaders, the ones taking over the world, essentially. Okay? And the leaders taking over in this 3-year period, they're going to be thrust into leadership positions, coming into their own. The ones born in the mid to late 1960s, again, they need all the help they can get from my generation, the late 70s, early 80s, to help them, because we're closer in age, closer in relation to these early to mid 90s babies who are going to be the leaders, who are going to represent what the world is becoming. Okay, so this transition, it takes different rungs of a ladder, and you know, my generation is here literally to help the current leaders that are going to be thrust into power over the next few years to understand how to create a world that the future leaders, the ones born in the early to mid-90s, can take over and can understand. Okay? Because they don't understand the old ways. They literally cannot live within it. And they get, you know, the negative side of this generation is, you know, can be seen, especially in people that work with troubled youth and whatnot. This is just the extreme side of someone who is entering a world that they just cannot understand. They cannot understand it. It is outside of their ability to understand the way it is. And I guarantee you, if the world could change in a way they could understand it, that these people, their behaviors would get more under control. In other words, not under control in the sense that we're going to tell them what to do, but more under their own control, their own creative control, and not out of control and spastic in some ways. And we want to put all these poor, you know, young adults and kids on Ritalin and whatnot. But they're here because they're going to be the leaders of the new world. Okay, but it all matters what we decide now. It all matters these next 3 years. What we decide, how we decide to alter essentially the you know, the direction of the world and where it's headed. And because the babies born now in this 3-year window are just ready for the new world, and they are going to be, you know, about my age, about early 30s, when things culminate. Okay, they're going to be the adults living in the world that we're deciding to create while they're infants and while they're being born. Okay, very important role for anyone right now, for the baby boomers to show us in the most you know, selfless way how the system doesn't work. They're the examples of the system not working, and they'll be taken care of. Part of them being taken care of are the new structures that will be developed that will be more appropriate for individual liberty and coming out of the sense of having to be codependent to an employer your whole life just to deserve retirement, and then to have it not be there. You know, so a very selfless thing that this generation did for us, and they're going to show us that, again, the system doesn't work. And there will be ways to get taken care of. It won't be in the way they were told they were going to get taken care of. In other words, having a pension, a 401k, and all the stuff that's going to be there for them. It'll be in a different way, but it will work. Okay, and so they're doing their job. The babies born in the mid to late 1960s are, you know, going to do their job by taking the leadership positions. My generation is going to do our job by helping those leaders take those leadership positions and ensuring that they're making decisions, advising them to make decisions that are more reflective of the new and less of the old, okay, without making huge thrusts forward, you know, some kind of balance in the progress so that it's not too much of a change in a small period of time. And then we are also mentoring these young adults, they're young adults now, into their leadership positions that they'll take over, you know, a couple of decades from now. You know, and then that will set the stage for who's born here now in the next 3 years. So that's really the importance of what's coming up here. So we have these eclipses, we have the Venus retrograde in occultation, transitioning us into the feminine. Regulus entered Virgo, transitioning us into the feminine. And we have this square between Pluto and Uranus, which says now is a time to cultivate what was planted in the 1960s relative to this Virgo energy, relative to this Mother Earth kind of energy, this sense of doing what makes sense with our resources and everything I've already mentioned. You know, it's time. It is time now. And even though the world, to everyone alive today who has just had this world view that's only gotten worse and worse with Regulus in the last degree of Leo, to understand that, you know, it is time for a change, and it can change, even though everything we've seen to this point would be contrary to that idea. Okay? It's time. So, with that, thank you for joining me. This has been a lot of good information flying through. I appreciate you joining me. If you want to contact me through sovereignharmony.com or sovereignharmony.biz, or if you want to check out my astrology website, I'll actually have this video posted up there at sovereignharmonyastro.com. So again, I'm Christopher Taylor with Sovereign Harmony. Happy Mother's Day. Happy, you know, ushering in this sacred feminine over this time period. It's time for balance. It's time to change. It doesn't have to happen overnight, but, you know, let's do our job. Let's do what we're here to do, and we'll be living in a world that makes more sense to everyone. So with that, have a good one. Bye-bye.